Welcome to the First Unitarian Universalist Society of Albany, also known as Albany UU. I'd like to extend a special welcome to those who are visiting with us this morning, whether in person or online. We aspire to be a beloved community, open and welcoming to all. If you'd like to know more about this congregation, please join us after service for coffee, conversation, or you can check out our welcome table. This morning, we welcome to our pulpit Tom Mercer. Tom is a longtime member of this congregation who joined back in 1981. Over the years, he's served on many boards, committees, and projects of Albany UU, and he's no stranger to this pulpit. We're pleased to welcome him back. He is proud to have had a career in public service. He's also an independent filmmaker and a history buff. These days, he wears a mask in public because he has pulmonary fibrosis, and he must be careful about contracting any respiratory viruses. So after the service, Tom will exit directly, but if you have comments or reactions, he would be glad to receive an email or a phone call from you. So please turn off your electronic devices, and I invite you to briefly say hello to someone near you. If you're on Zoom, you're welcome to unmute and greet others online.
Good morning, everybody.
Good morning.
Hello.
Hello.
Good morning.
Hello, Geraldine.
Let's pause our conversations and come back together as we listen to our prelude, The Lone Wild Bird by William Walker, presented by Olga Martinez and Chris Milkins.
By war, by the suffering we inflict and endure, when minds across borders fail to reason and compromise. We come this day called by loss, the deaths of those who serve in our name, those whose lives end before their natural cause, in service to a cause greater than their own. We come this day called by hope, hope that we will in some season finally surrender our swords for plowshares. And we come this day called by peace. May we hear its song, may we proclaim its promise. May we remember today, renew our struggle. Our opening hymn is My Country 'Tis of Thee. The words are printed in your order of service and they'll be shown on the screen. As a denunciation of monarchy in 1832, Samuel French Smith wrote new lyrics to the British anthem, God Save the King. The third verse drives home his point. No more shall tyrants here with haughty steps appear. No more shall tyrants tread above the patriot dead. If the Spirit moves you, let's put a little extra gusto into that third verse. Because patriotism is not just for those who define it in their political rhetoric.
Each week when we gather, we light a chalice, symbol of Unitarian Universalism. Please join with me in saying our chalice lighting words. On this Sunday, commemorating Memorial Day, we light our chalice in honor of those who have given their last full measure in service of our country.
Our story this morning is Terrible Things by Eve Bunting, illustrated by Stephen Gamel.
Good morning. My name is Alice Sage, and I am one of the pastoral care associates who work with our minister, Reverend Ann, to provide spiritual care in this community. If there is something going on for you, please reach out to us. And as it is Memorial Day, I would like to read Memorial Day and Mindfulness. Memorial Day may have official roots honoring Union dead, but veteran poets of recent wars serving the United States have found ways to honor all those who have died in battle. Our country may be divided, but by taking a moment to pause and reflect on names etched on monument walls or gravestones, everyone on benches may see their own reflections, and in so doing, further the task President Abraham Lincoln outlined in his 1865 address, his second inaugural address, to bind up the nation's wounds, to do all which may achieve and cherish a just and lasting peace among ourselves and all nations. And so we pause not to celebrate, but to remember, because memory is the least we can offer for everything they gave.
Tom has selected 3 excerpts for our readings this morning. The first is from Abraham Lincoln. He delivered his speech during a formal dedication of the Gettysburg National Cemetery on the grounds of the Civil War's deadliest and most decisive battle. This is part of what he said. Our fathers brought forth on this new continent a new nation, conceived in liberty and dedicated to the proposition that all men are created equal. Now we are engaged in a great civil war, testing whether that nation can long endure. We are met on a great battlefield of that war. We have come to dedicate a portion of that field as a final resting place for those who here gave their lives that that nation might live. But in a larger sense, we cannot dedicate, we cannot consecrate, we cannot hallow this ground. The brave men who struggled here have consecrated it. For these honored dead, we take increased devotion to that cause for which they gave the last full measure of devotion, that we here highly resolved that these dead shall not have died in vain, that this nation shall have a new birth of freedom, and that government of the people, by the people, for the people, shall not perish from the earth. Our second reading is from Major General Smedley Butler, whose United States Marine Corps was the most decorated Marine in U.S. history. After he retired in 1931, he made a nationwide speaking tour. Here is some of what he said. I helped make Mexico safe for American oil interests. I helped make Haiti and Cuba a decent place for the national city bank boys to collect revenues. I helped in the raping of half a dozen Central American republics for the benefit of Wall Street. I helped purify Nicaragua for the international banking house of Brown Brothers. I brought light to the Dominican Republic for American sugar interest. In China, I helped see to it that Standard Oil went its way unmolested. War is a racket. It always has been. It is possibly the oldest, easily the most profitable, surely the most vicious. It is the only one in which the profits are reckoned in dollars and the losses in lives. It is conducted for the benefit of the very few at the expense of the very many. Out of war, a few people make huge fortunes. This speech was so well received that it was published as a book in 1935. Finally, Albany native Henry Johnson answered the call to serve in the First World War, enlisting in the US Army, and became part of the 369th Infantry Regiment, known as the Harlem Hellfighters. The regiment, composed primarily of African American soldiers, served under French command due to racial prejudices of the US military at the time. On the night of May 14th, 1918, in the Argonne Forest of France, while on night sentry duty with his comrade Needham Roberts, Johnson faced a German raiding party of approximately 20 soldiers. Outnumbered and outgunned, he fought valiantly to defend his post and protect his wounded comrade. Johnson's courage was extraordinary. He used his rifle, grenades, and even a bolo knife in close combat, refusing to back down despite being severely wounded. His actions not only saved Roberts from capture, but also prevented a breach in their line, thwarting the enemy's assault. Johnson's injuries left him unable to work, and he lived the rest of his life in poverty, largely forgotten by the nation he had served so bravely.
Thank you, Carolyn. All of human history is punctuated by war. Fighting over territory and resources, fighting for dominance, fighting for defense, blood feuding, fighting for freedom. War brings suffering, loss, and destruction. It leaves scars on individuals, families, and entire nations. As Unitarian Universalists, we affirm the inherent worth and dignity of every person. We commit to justice, equality, and compassion in human relations. We aspire to a world community with peace, liberty, and justice for all. These values push us towards a vision of nonviolence and reconciliation. And yet, history reminds us that there are moments when the refusal to act or to fight can enable even greater suffering. When faced with the horrors of genocide, oppression, or unprovoked aggression, is it moral to remain passive? The struggle between pacifism and the justification for war is a profound spiritual and ethical challenge. War is always a tragedy, even when it's necessary. It tests our humanity, challenges us to balance justice with compassion and action with restraint. The tension between the necessity and moral costs of war is as old as human history. Religious traditions, philosophers, and moral thinkers have wrestled with this question for centuries. The concept of a just war has its roots in ancient and medieval thought, particularly the works of Augustine and Aquinas. It was later developed into a formal doctrine within various religion and secular traditions. Just war theory offers a framework to assess the morality of each conflict. A just war theory has 6 principles. A just cause. The war must seek redress of a grave injustice, such as defending against aggression or protecting innocent lives. Legitimate authority. It must be declared by a rightful governing body, not individuals acting on impulse for personal gain. Right intention. Its purpose must be to establish peace, not to dominate, exploit, or exact revenge. Last resort. All peaceful alternatives must have been exhausted before resorting to violence. Proportionality. The harm caused by the war must not outweigh the good it seeks to achieve. Collateral damage. Non-combatants must be protected to the fullest extent possible. This morning, I will use the lens of a just war to consider some of the most significant wars in U.S. history. You may interpret history differently than I do. I merely offer food for thought. 2.5 centuries ago, our nation was born in a war for independence. It is generally considered a just war, though there is some debate regarding motives and outcomes. Just cause. We can justify the American Revolution as the triumph of equality over aristocratic rule. The American independence movement challenged the assumption that some people are entitled to rule by birthright of wealth inherited from distant European ancestors. The ideals of liberty and the proposition that all men are created equal is enshrined in our framing documents. It was a last resort. Diplomatic efforts like the Olive Branch Petition failed. Proportionality and collateral damage. Well, the independence movement was an activist minority. About 1/3 of the population supported and fought for the king. Another third figured somebody's going to tax us either way, and they tried to stay neutral. The patriots and loyalists treated each other savagely. When the king's army was finally defeated, many loyalists lost their property and their livelihoods. On Memorial Day, as we honor the rebelling patriots, let's not forget the sacrifice and suffering of their friends, neighbors, and family members who were the Tories. The War of 1812. As Europe was embroiled in the Napoleonic War, British needed more sailors for their navy. They would attack American ships at sea and force sailors into the service of the Royal Navy. This challenged American independence. Diplomatic measures were attempted but unsuccessful. Congress declared war on Britain. There was right intention and legitimate authority. America was justified in defending itself from aggression. The British response was disproportional. They invaded and caused significant destruction, burning Washington, D.C., including the White House. Ultimately, the war ended in a draw. The Treaty of Ghent was signed on December 24th, 1814. On Memorial Day, we remember those who repelled this hostile invasion. In 1846, the United States declared war against Mexico. There was no just cause. The United States was the aggressor under the expansionist doctrine Manifest Destiny. No right intention. It was not fought as a last resort. It was not proportional. It resulted in significant territorial gains for the U.S. at Mexico's expense. Henry David Thoreau saw this war as unnecessary imperialistic aggression. He refused to pay his poll tax as protest. He was arrested and spent a night in jail. According to the oft-told story, Ralph Waldo Emerson visited Thoreau in jail and asked why he was in there. Thoreau purportedly responded, "Why are you not in here?" Thoreau's time in jail had a profound influence on him. A few years later, he wrote the famous essay, Civil Disobedience, and said, "If 1,000 men were not to pay their tax bills this year, that would not be as violent and bloody a measure as it would be to pay them and enable the state to commit violence and shed innocent blood." On Memorial Day, let's remember civil disobedience to unjust wars. The Civil War is considered a just war for the United States as they fought against the Confederate States. Politically powerful plantation owners in the southern states did not fully accept the revolutionary proposition that all men are created equal because their wealth depended on the labor of enslaved people. Fearing nationwide abolition of slavery, the southern states seceded from the Constitution and fired on the U.S. Army at Fort Sumter. The Confederate cause, preserving slavery, is agreed by most to be unjust. The Union cause, initially defense and upholding the constitutional order, is considered to be just. Later, with the Emancipation Proclamation, the Union also had right intention, abolition of slavery. War came as a last resort. Multiple compromises failed to prevent secession. Collateral damage and proportionality, there was extensive destruction in the South, high casualties on both sides. At Gettysburg, in the aftermath of that great battle, which resulted in the largest number of casualties, President Lincoln said, in reference to the fallen Union soldiers, "We here highly resolve that these dead shall not have died in vain." But what about the Confederate soldiers? Are we to conclude their death was in vain? This is always the case in war. Many will die in vain. That's something we should also remember on Memorial Day. The Native American War of Genocide. Ever since first contact, Europeans waged war on the indigenous peoples of America. During the entire 19th century, the United States conducted an unrelenting mass genocide of Native peoples. There really can be no justification for this long, brutal war. On Memorial Day, let us remember the trail of tears and wounded knee and all the other atrocities conducted against Native Americans. The Spanish-American War fails the test of a just war on the criteria of a just cause, right intention, last resort, and proportionality. In 1898, an explosion of unknown origin sank the battleship USS Maine while it was harbored in the Spanish colony of Cuba. 266 crew members were killed. The sinking of the Maine was used to inflame American passions against Spain. There were limited diplomatic efforts to resolve the conflict. The U.S. had a strong military advantage, and motivated by imperial ambitions, Congress declared war against Spain. In defeat, Spain relinquished Cuba, Guam, Puerto Rico, and the Philippines to the United States. The United States also annexed the independent state of Hawaii during the conflict. Teddy Roosevelt fought in this war with gusto, leading the Rough Riders in the famous attack on San Juan Hill. General Smedley Butler, who we heard from in the reading, also fought in this war. On Memorial Day, we should remember he said, "War is a racket." The Great War, later called World War I. European countries were competitively expanding their empires and forming secret alliances to protect themselves from perceived threats. This complex web of rivalries led to an arms race of new technologies. In 1914, the increased tensions and competition for power erupted in war. It fails the test of a just war on most criteria. The European conflict devolved into a prolonged stalemate of miserable trench warfare. At sea, Germany's submarines were attacking passenger and merchant ships. In April 1917, with the toll of sunken U.S. merchant ships and civilian casualties rising, Congress declared war on Germany at the request of President Wilson. America's involvement can be considered just. President Wilson argued that if we entered the war with our ideals, we could make this war a war to end all wars and make the world safe for democracy. American involvement broke the battlefield stalemate in favor of the French and British democracies. Right intention, just cause, last resort, the United States entered after repeated provocations, legitimate authority, Congress declared war. The League of Nations was established as a means of avoiding future wars, but it soon collapsed, and the terms of the peace treaty, with its harsh reparations and poorly drawn borders, led to future conflicts rather than the end of all wars. This was Henry Johnson's war. Thanks to the efforts of activists, historians, and veterans, he was posthumously awarded the Purple Heart in 1996. In 2002, he received Distinguished Service Cross, and in 2015, President Barack Obama awarded him the Medal of Honor, the highest military decoration in the United States. More than 4 million Americans served, and 116,708 lost their lives in World War I. On Memorial Day, we remember the kind of heroism that Henry Johnson's resilience and determination exemplify. Many would say World War II was the most justified of America's wars. It is often cited as a necessary response to an existential threat posed by fascism and genocide. It was the last resort. The U.S. remained neutral and entered after a direct attack. Legitimate authority, war was declared by Congress. Just cause, response to Axis aggression, right intention, defeat of totalitarian regimes, and end to atrocities. Collateral damage to civilians, extensive bombings of London, Dresden, Hiroshima, and Nagasaki, to mention a few. With World War II, we approached the edge of living memory. My father and uncles served in World War II. They all survived. The war was never a topic of discussion at family gatherings. My dad never talked about his personal experience fighting the Japanese in New Guinea and the Philippines. In the 1990s, when Tom Brokaw was urging the greatest generation to record their recollections of the war, my dad agreed to record a video interview with me. Disappointingly, he only spoke broadly of the troop movements his company was in and textbook generalities. But years later, near the end of his life, in one of the very last conversations I had with him, he made what seems like an unburdening of his secret torment. Out of the blue, he suddenly changed the topic of conversation. He spoke of a time he was on patrol with his men when he spotted a Japanese sniper. He said to me, if I hadn't shot him first, he would have shot me and who knows who else. On Memorial Day, we remember those who served with quiet distinction and returned home to raise families and build a prosperous nation. At the end of World War II, Korea, which had been a Japanese colony, was divided by the Soviet Union and the United States into two occupation zones, with plans for a future independent state. Instead, the zones formed their own governments. Both claimed to be the sole legitimate government of all Korea. On June 25, 1950, the Korean People's Army, equipped and trained by the Soviets, launched an invasion of the South. The UN Security Council denounced the attack and recommended member states repel the invasion. UN forces comprised 21 countries, with the United States in command. They retook territory roughly back to the original dividing line. Combat ended in 1953 with the signing of the Korean Armistice Agreement. The conflict caused more than 1 million military deaths and an estimated 2 to 3 million civilian deaths. There was just cause, defense of South Korea from North Korean invasion, legitimate authority, a UN-sanctioned and US-led coalition, right intention, support for democratic South Korea, but proportionality, there were high casualties and limited territorial change. On Memorial Day, we remember the United Nations and international efforts for peacekeeping. Now, the Vietnam War is well within living memory. With us here this morning, there may be veterans or others who were personally touched by that war, as well as the wars that follow. I shall proceed with all due respect. The stated intention of the Vietnam War was to prevent spread of communism and support South Vietnam's independence. But in the execution, it is generally understood to have been an unjust war. Legitimate authority, U.S. involvement escalated without a formal declaration. It was, in terms of a last resort, diplomatic efforts were not fully pursued. Collateral damage, extensive destruction, and civilian casualties. Proportionality, the harm caused by the war did not outweigh the good it sought to achieve. It resulted in American defeat. We sacrificed 58,000 Americans, in the process 2 million Vietnamese and perhaps another 2 million Southeast Asians in Cambodia, Laos, and beyond lost their lives. The Vietnam War left a legacy of profound division and grief at home and bitterly divided the nation. Returning veterans, many of them having been drafted against their will, were shamefully dishonored. Veterans faced negative reactions from both opponents of the war, who viewed them as having killed innocent civilians, and its supporters, who saw them as having lost the war. Veterans suffered physical damage, including the effects of exposure to toxic herbicide Agent Orange, millions of gallons of which had been dumped by U.S. planes on the dense forests of Vietnam. Some 500,000 Vietnam veterans suffered from post-traumatic stress disorder, and rates of divorce, suicide, alcoholism, and drug addiction were markedly higher among veterans. The effects of the Vietnam War lingered long after the last troops returned home. The massive spending on the war led to widespread inflation, exacerbated a worldwide oil crisis, and skyrocketing fuel prices. On Memorial Day, we remember the sacrifices of those who believed in a cause greater than themselves, who were drafted but served honorably, and the protesters who helped end the war with mass demonstrations. The Gulf War generally satisfies the principles of a just war. In 1990, Iraq invaded neighboring Kuwait and captured its oil fields. It was a just cause, the Iraqi invasion of its neighbor. Right intentions restore Kuwait's sovereignty, but that intention was tainted somewhat by corporate oil interests. Legitimate authority was UN sanctioned and US led. Last resort diplomatic efforts had failed. Proportionality, a swift military action with limited objectives, and once the objective was achieved, the fighting ended. On Memorial Day, we remember our leaders who applied diplomacy, efficiently achieved necessary military objectives, and exercised restraint, resisting the temptation to overreach. The war in Afghanistan could have been a just war. There was just cause, response to the 9/11 attacks, legitimate authority, NATO and the UN supported it, right intention, the Taliban authorities governing Afghanistan were harboring the mastermind of the 9/11 attacks, the Al-Qaeda leader Osama bin Laden. The US demanded Afghanistan extradite him to the United States. The Taliban refused. A bombing campaign on Al-Qaeda targets ensued. The Taliban then offered to hand Osama bin Laden over to a third country if the US stopped its bombing and provided evidence of his guilt. The US insisted its demands were not subject to negotiation. This might have been a just war if negotiations had been pursued. Instead, US and NATO forces invaded Afghanistan, toppling the Taliban and establishing a new democratic authority, and international rebuilding efforts were launched. It might have been a just war if the goal of the new democratic authority to prevent the Taliban from returning to power had been achieved. But US attention and resources were diverted to a new war in Iraq. By 2003, the Taliban had reorganized and waged guerrilla warfare. By 2007, large parts of Afghanistan had been retaken by the Taliban. In response, the US-led coalition began an influx of troops. In 2011, the US covert operation led to the killing of Osama bin Laden. It might have been a just war with the death of the mastermind of the 9/11 attacks, but by that time, the coalition forces had surged to 140,000, and the counterinsurgency against the Taliban was underway. The fighting dragged on for another 10 years without defeating the Taliban. In 2020, the US agreed to a deal with the Taliban to withdraw all US troops from Afghanistan by 2021. This was America's longest war, costing $2.3 trillion. It might have been a just war if that kind of funding had been invested in rebuilding the Democratic Republic back in 2002 when the Taliban first was toppled. Instead, on Memorial Day, we are left to remember 47,000 Afghan civilians killed, 66,000 Afghan military and police killed, 51,000 Taliban fighters killed, 2,500 American service members killed, 3,800 US contractors killed, 1,100 NATO and other allied service members killed, and one Osama bin Laden killed. The Iraq War fails the test of a just war on virtually every criterion. It was based on the false claim that Iraq possessed weapons of mass destruction and that Saddam Hussein was supporting al-Qaeda. Unstated motives were regime change and access to oil. The 9/11 Commission concluded that there was no credible evidence linking Saddam to al-Qaeda, and no weapons of mass destruction were found in Iraq. These false claims faced widespread criticism. Kofi Annan, then Secretary General of the United Nations, declared the invasion illegal under international law. And a 2016 British inquiry concluded the war was unnecessary. The Iraq War led to an estimated 1 million deaths, including civilians, with most occurring during the post-invasion insurgency ensuing civil war. On Memorial Day, let us not forget the often used playbook for unjust wars. Leaders create irrational fear of an impending threat to convince the public that military action is needed to eliminate that threat and quell the public fear. The United States is currently engaged in at least 2 proxy wars, Gaza and Ukraine. We have had many proxy wars in our long history, some just, some not. Those fighters and civilians who have fallen in our proxy wars should not be forgotten on Memorial Day. Their sacrifices should count for no less than our own. The theory of a just war aims to impose moral discipline on the chaos of war. But as we know, in the fog of conflict, these ideals are often difficult, if not impossible, to uphold. So is there ever a moral justification for war? Perhaps the answer lies not in certainty, but in humility. War, even when justified, is a reminder of our human frailty and imperfection. It calls us to mourn, to reflect, and to strive for a world where such sacrifices are no longer needed.
This community is here and strong because of the generosity of those who came before and those who are here now. At present, we are sharing the plate each Sunday. This means the contributions that are not specifically labeled as 100% pledge will be split 50-50 between a local charity and this congregation. The organization receiving those donations this month is Refugee and Immigrant Support Services of Emmaus, or RISE. It's a local nonprofit dedicated to welcoming, supporting, and celebrating refugees and immigrants. RISE supports immigrants through language classes, immigration and employment assistance, youth programming, and case management. Every Sunday in May, our congregation has shared the plate with RISE. That means that your contribution made by cash, check made out to Albany UU, or text will be split between Albany UU and RISE unless you tell us otherwise. If you want your entire contribution to go towards your annual pledge, write pledge on the memo line of your check. This will be the second month of a 3-month Share the Plate pilot proposed by the social justice team. In June, our collection will be shared with the Focus Food Pantry.
You do something
Results
so
will be
you deserve
used
a
to
haircut.
decide whether Albany UU should continue to share the plate every Sunday with a nonprofit working to make positive change in our community and the wider world. If you are online, you can click on the tiny URL link in the chat window to contribute, or you can text the number shown on the screen indicating the amount and purposes shown on the slide. Or you can always mail a check. Here in Community Hall, you can give in those ways, or place cash or check in the basket that will come around during the offertory music. Please give today in whatever amount feels right for you. Our offertory music is Standing on the Shoulders by Joyce Rouse, presented by Olga Martinez and Chris Milkins. The offering will be gratefully received.
On this day of remembrance, we hold in our hearts the lives lost and the dreams left unfulfilled. Let us dedicate ourselves anew to the principles of justice and peace, so that the sacrifices of war will lead us closer to a world where such sacrifices are no longer necessary. Our closing hymn is in the gray hymnal, Part in Peace, number 411. Please rise in body or spirit.
As we extinguish our chalice, please join in the words shown on the screen. We extinguish the chalice, the light of truth, the warmth of community, or the fire of commitment. These we carry in our hearts until we are together again.